there, spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scaryish podcast.
Woo!
I'm Robin Grace, this is Adam Diaz.
Hello.
And today we're here to talk about a couple cool topics, I think.
I agree.
In honor of Women's Day, which is the day that we're recording, not necessarily the day that you guys are going to hear this, I decided to go with a woman-centric true crime.
It's pretty awesome. So I'm pretty excited. I did not have a female-themed topic, but that said, shout out to all the ladies who run the world. You're amazing. I'm going to be covering something that we actually have covered before, so a second installment, in fact, and it's going to be time travel, and I am really, really excited to do it. So I think you're going to be going first, but before we move into our topics, we're going to give a quick shout out to some patrons. Robin, take it away.
Thank you so much to Jessica, Sam and Andrew, Marissa, and Ethan for being such huge supporters of the podcast. We really couldn't do it without you.
Sincerely, we could not. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. That is our shout out for you because honestly, it is amazing that we have anyone supporting us and to see people joining up and going to patreon.com/Scaryish podcast and signing up every time we get one of those notifications. We have a new patron. We're like, oh my God, people actually listen and people actually support us. It's this amazing feeling. So thank you so much. We sincerely appreciate it. But that said, Robin, why don't you take the lead and lead the way and run the world?
All right. So I get it now. Got it. So instead of the victim in this gruesome tale, because it's International Women's Day, I was like, you know what? I'm going to make it so the woman is the hunter in this instance.
I like that mindset.
So this week I'm going to be covering the antics of a serial killer called Jolly Jane Toppan.
Nice.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention, if you hear anything that sounds like two dogs in the background,
it's because we have two dogs in the background.
It's because our dogs are in the studio tonight with us. Because our corgi, who was not feeling well last week, is doing a whole lot better. Knock on wood. So thank you to everyone who sent up healing words. We appreciate that. Our Shiba is now not feeling well, so we think it was something contagious that our corgi caught while they were at the vet and has passed it along to our other dog. So we're keeping a close eye on both of them. So.
Yeah.
Just want to let you folks know, if the episode is heavily edited or you notice something jarring, it's likely due to an animal emergency where we had to stop recording. Fingers crossed that does not happen. But all right, I'm sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
All right, so the 1800s obviously witnessed a whole bunch of horrible things. The American Civil War,
yep.
Probably one of them, probably one of the worst ones, the big ones. Massachusetts was the backdrop for Jane's particularly murderous intent. Supposedly, she claimed that it was her life goal to, quote, have killed more people, helpless people, than any other man or woman who ever lived, end quote.
Really horrific.
It is horrific. And this is taking place right after the Civil War. You know what I mean? Because Civil War ended, 1850-something?
No.
1860-something?
1860-something. I think it was 1867,
So she's
maybe?
born... Oh, I'll get into it. She's born in 1850-something.
So she had this goal at a very young age?
No. Jane was actually born Honora Kelly on March 31st, 1854. So by the time she started killing, it's like the Civil War just ended. People are probably trying to rebuild, and then she's coming in like, gonna start murdering people.
It's like, we're rebuilding the country, time to get going.
So she grew up in Boston's female asylum, and this was an institution that cared for unwanted female children that were often left abandoned. She grew up there with her sister Delia, as well as over 100 other children. And if you think that's a lot, it's right now in the U.S., there's 100,000 to 400,000 kids waiting to get adopted.
Wow.
If not more.
That number is staggering.
Yeah. So, the place she was in just had her and 100 other kids. But now, it's really depressing to think about. I had to look it up. I was like, 100 sounds like a lot. And then I looked up how many kids are, and it's just nuts. For these two, they were the daughters of Irish immigrants. And their mother was Bridget Kelly, who died of tuberculosis when she was really young. So their father, Peter Kelly, was all they had left. And he was well known as an eccentric and an abusive alcoholic. So these girls are really young. All they have is their dad, and their dad is just this guy who has been so well known to be pretty cray-cray that they nicknamed him Kelly the Crack.
Wow.
Not as in, crack as in crackpot, not as in like he does a bunch of crack or something like that. You know what I mean? You never really know. It's the 1800s. Did crack exist then?
I don't think so.
Okay. I don't know. I know nothing about drugs. Rumors started that he was so insane that his madness drove him to sew his own eyelids shut while working as a tailor.
That's horrific.
Obviously, it could be just over-exaggeration, stories told over and over again about this crazy guy in the square or something, you know what I mean? And they just make up these urban legends about him.
Bullshit tales.
It's something like sewing your eyelids shut is like out of a horror movie. It's just absolutely terrifying.
It's legitimately straight up out of a horror movie.
In 1860, a few years after their mother died, their dad, Peter, decided to take the two, Delia, only 8 years old at the time, and Honora, 6 years old, to the orphanage. Back in the day, it wasn't only abandonments that found children in the care of orphanages, because there were families that if they couldn't afford all their kids, they would drop their kids off at these places.
Wow.
And these places would take care of their kids until years down the road when they either came to pick up their kids again or whatnot. Which I think is very strange because they don't obviously, I mean, now we don't have orphanages. We have foster homes and things like that. And it's kind of the same thing, but not the same thing at the same time. You know what I mean? But
yeah, just the evolution of that over time
it's really complicated. The whole system is so incredibly complicated. Their father, though, never came back to get them. And records from the asylum note that the sisters were, quote unquote, rescued from a miserable home. So that's the reason why they were left there. Nora was fostered as an indentured servant to a widow named Anne Toppan in Lowell, Massachusetts. Anne decided to change her name to Jane, which is why she's known as Jane Toppan. She's never formally adopted, but she did take their surname. So they never adopted her, but she liked them so much, she just decided, I'm a Toppan now, which
and happily ever after they lived.
Right. Unfortunately for Delia, she was sent into prostitution on the streets as soon as she was old enough to be. Their older sister, Nellie, was never committed to the orphanage, but was supposedly committed to a mental asylum. So they don't all get happy endings, you know what I mean?
It doesn't sound like any of them got a happy ending.
It's a really rough time to be alive in. At 19, Jane was released of her indentured servitude and was given $50 to start her own life. And what she ended up doing was willingly work for that family until Anne passes away and her daughter is old enough to get married and leaves the house. So then in 1885, Jane takes the time to attend trainings at Cambridge Hospital to become a nurse. While there, she works as a student nurse that actually gets along well with her patients. Something that I don't find endearing is that she would then falsify patient records to keep them in the hospital for longer stays.
Oh, wow. So she was basically making friends and deciding that she was going to keep people sick.
Supposedly, it was to be able to get to know them better. This is where she took on the moniker of Jolly Jane.
Wow.
But then that's where the good vibes kind of end. So, you know, all this stuff, good stuff happens to her. She gets these skills. She starts becoming a nurse. And then things start coming out, right? She has strong feelings towards her elderly patients. These patients she considered useless and not worth keeping alive.
Wow.
Which is fucked up. It's purported that she killed at least a dozen patients while working as a student nurse. What she would do was dose her patients with morphine and atropine to see how their bodies would react to it. And then she would keep upping the dosages until they overdosed and died. And she eventually evolved into using other drugs, testing out different things, staging a sickness with some type of poison or drug, and then she'd nurse them back to health again. And it's just like some crazy Munchausen by proxy type thing. And I'm sure it led her to get a lot of attention. Like, wow, she has these crazy skills. This person was like on their deathbed, but somehow you've brought them back to life. It's a miracle. You know what I mean?
Also, shout out to Zooey Deschanel, whose band is named Munchausen by Proxy.
Is it? Really?
I told you that downstairs. Yeah.
Oh.
Her band is actually in Yes Man. Like she says, that's her band, Munchausen by Proxy.
And that's her real band?
That's her real band.
Oh,
yeah.
wow, that's cute. Okay, getting back to this. I say that she probably got a lot of praise because she does go on to become a full-fledged nurse. She was even recommended to the Massachusetts General Hospital in 1889, which is apparently a really prestigious hospital. I am not sure if it is now, but apparently back then it must have been.
It was like the Seattle Grace of its day.
Seattle Grace.
Isn't that the name
From
of the hospital?
Grey's Anatomy?
From Grey's Anatomy, yeah.
She claims a couple more victims there at that hospital before she's fired the following year. So she obviously wasn't there that long. She did return to Cambridge for a short stint, but was let go because of reckless administration of opiates. So,
giving out all the drugs.
Things are starting to kind of fall like dominoes, right? Bad things are starting to pile up. Go figure. But she still wasn't caught. So even after all these things and these firings for these crazy reasons, she's not caught. She continues on to work as a private nurse for families around Boston. What went on without notice was that she would kill the older members of the family and then steal their belongings.
Wow.
And because of how slow the poisonings were, no one caught on. And a lot of the times these people had underlying illnesses already.
So they would just blame the disease.
Right. And she did this for years. And then in 1895, she kills her landlord, Israel Dunham, and his wife. In 1899, she kills her foster sister, Elizabeth. So the girl that she kind of grew up with, she ends up killing.
That's so sad.
And she actually really got along with her, too.
So it's just like, I don't know what sort of heartbreak she suffered in life that, like, was the final straw, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because to go back and wind up killing your foster sister seems like, that's, I don't know. For the rest of them, I understand, like, she's off, you know?
Yeah.
There's something off there, but that one just seems deeply personal.
So she kills Elizabeth with a dose of strychnine. Some say she killed Elizabeth out of jealousy, and others say she simply had the urge to kill whoever was convenient. What she does afterwards, though, supposedly, is pursue Elizabeth's husband after she dies.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's starting to come into focus a little bit there.
And then in 1901, she moves in with a man named Alden Davis, who happened to be elderly, and his family as well. Within weeks, she kills him, his sister Edna, and two of his daughters, Minnie and Genevieve.
She's like accelerating her timeline at this point.
If she got bored of you or found you a nuisance or maybe just in her way of whatever it was that she wanted, she really didn't hesitate. She had no hesitation. She was just like, I am going to kill you. It wasn't until she began using a metallic-based poison that she was caught. And so this poison led to an investigation with Jane as their main suspect. The surviving members of that Davis family ordered a toxicology exam on Minnie, Davis's youngest daughter, and the poisoning was reported as the cause of death. And so local authorities assigned a police detail to Jane to follow her and watch her. And whatever they witnessed led to her arrest. So she gets arrested.
But this is like the late 1800s, so basically her walking along the street without a man telling her she's allowed to was cause to arrest her at that point.
I don't know if they just follow her to a bunch of different families or like
I just
sees
don't
her
see,
buy drugs.
I just don't see the police of that era having due process. You know what I mean?
Who knows? I don't know. I wasn't there. All we know is the results of whatever happened.
Fair enough.
The case gets taken to court in 1902, where she's determined to be not guilty. But a verdict of not guilty doesn't necessarily mean that she was innocent. It just means that they weren't able to prove without a shadow of a doubt that she is the one that did it.
Right.
And because it's like early 1900s, late 1800s, they don't have all of the tools that we have now to be like, nope, yep.
It's crazy to think that in my lifetime we didn't have DNA evidence.
You're
like,
right.
It wasn't a thing.
Wasn't it until like the 1980s or something?
It was late 80s. They started to develop it. 90s when it became admissible in court.
Yeah, that's just crazy.
When I was born in 85, that wasn't a fucking thing. So back in the 1880s, it was probably even more difficult to prove someone did something.
Yeah.
So it's like you really were better off being a defense attorney because all you had to do was cast doubt. You know,
Right.
If you can cast doubt and there's not like solid evidence, then you might just have a person that walks out scot-free.
Though she was found not guilty, she confessed to her lawyer later that she had killed 31 people.
Wow.
So she confesses to her lawyer afterwards, I killed 31 people, and she even said that sometimes she would lay in bed with them as they died. She's terrifying.
I mean, that's so nice of her, though.
An article published in the Hoosier State Chronicles shortly after her arrest reported that she would even fondle them as they died, attempting to see the inner workings of their souls through their eyes.
Wow. That's some serial killer shit right there. They're watching their souls leave their eyes. Like
not the poisoning of multiple people.
I mean, there's like murderer and then there's like crazy serial killer where they have this motivation when it's like feeling like they're God manipulating someone's soul.
Yeah.
That comes into play. So yeah, that one rings like really scarily true.
She claimed to get a sexual thrill from patients being near death, then recovering, then dying again. And anyway, this bout of confessions leads to another trial, the result of which, on June 23rd, found her not guilty by reason of insanity and had her sentenced to life in Toppan Insane Hospital. So she spends the rest of her life in this mental institution.
Wouldn't she have lawyer-client...
Confidentiality?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know when that started, when that was a thing, but it sounds like she basically told her lawyer, like, so this is what really happened. And the lawyer's like, okay, I'm just going to go get the judge, BRB.
So she gets sentenced to this mental institution, and that's despite her insisting that she was completely sane. So...
Crazy people don't know they're crazy.
To her, she claimed that if she knew what she was doing and she knew that it was wrong, there's no way that she could be insane. Because she wanted to be able to get out again. Apparently, from what I read, it was saying that if she were sentenced to this insane asylum, there's no way for her to get released. She'd just be stuck in there forever. But I don't know how it actually worked.
Right.
You know, it could have been different.
It's certainly very different now if you get sentenced somewhere for, like, reason of insanity, like the things you have to go through where you can get released. So, again, late 1800s, who knows?
Yeah. When she first arrived at the asylum, she refused to eat, thinking her food may, in fact, be poisoned. Newspapers talked about it being an ironic revenge because she thought that her food was being poisoned. She stayed at the asylum until she died on August 17th, 1938, at the age of 84.
Wow.
After she died, there was a bit of a revival of her antics, like stories started coming out about what she did. Again, you know, revival. Some claimed her to be America's first serial killer, which is something I find hard to believe considering we had H.H. Holmes before that.
How long ago? Or how long before, I should say?
I think H.H. Holmes was 1850s.
Have we covered him?
No.
Wow.
So that's a different episode entirely.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been waiting for you to cover him because that's a lot of research.
Wow, fudge you.
But maybe
this one's really hard work. I'm gonna let him take care of it.
Maybe I'll cover it sometime soon.
I did Manson, and man, that was so much research.
Yeah, H.H. Holmes is going to be a lot of research too, because he has that whole murder castle thing going on. It's nuts. Anyway, that's a different episode entirely, and we'll get to it eventually. Some seem to consider her an angel of death, but I don't necessarily think she's like an angel of mercy because she didn't do these things out of any thoughts of mercy. She had some strange pleasure that she took from doing these things. And I don't know if that's two different things, you know, an angel of death and angel of mercy. I know they kind of go together though, being when people think murdering nurse, angel of death type
If I
thing.
like got up to go to the restroom in the middle of the night and I walk into the restroom or I walk into the hallway and there's two beings there and one says, I am the angel of mercy. And the other one says, I'm the angel of death. I have two very distinct impressions of the one I'm scared of, and she is certainly the angel of death in this scenario.
She's even admitted to having a strong urge to poison. So it was just like she needed to kill things, needed to kill people.
She certainly had that God complex because when she says she had like that sexual like fulfillment
with the souls
from like bringing someone to near death and then bringing them back, that's definitely playing God. Like through my own actions, I could almost kill someone, and then through my actions, I could save them, and then I could just kill them after that.
Yeah.
Like that's certainly in that realm.
She even poisoned herself at times in order to gather sympathy from men who courted her.
Wow.
So she's definitely scary. Definitely
that's
like
Munchausen's right
yeah,
there.
For sure. But I don't know how much of it is just trying to manipulate other. Well, I mean that's what Munchausen's is, right? You're trying to manipulate other people.
Yeah, to get attention for being sick.
But yeah, so I thought female serial killer needed a little bit of light shown on them today because happy International Women's Day. I definitely don't think female killers are talked about enough. I mean, they are very rare. Female serial killers are very rare, but I had never actually heard of Jane Toppan until I covered this topic. So I think it's pretty neat.
It is. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
We've actually had this conversation before about how much more frequent it is, more likely it is for a serial killer to be male, you know?
Yeah.
And when it comes down to like the profiles that the FBI built out and how they target people, I think it's very distinct that the behaviors that come along with certain ways of killing or certain ways of hunting a serial killer kind of assume that the serial killer is male just based off of the fact that it happens so frequently.
Yeah.
And just saying that out loud and thinking about it more and more, I'm not quite sure. It makes sense that it's more likely to be a man because I think men are just generally more disgusting human beings and just can sink to a lower low. But that said, I do think that there's a meticulous nature about her in particular and some other female serial killers that I'm sure we're going to cover later that just sort of makes me wonder, like, what if the discrepancy in the numbers isn't as large as we think? What if the reason we think that number, that gap is so wide is because female serial killers tend to not get caught more often than men? And like, I've thought about that multiple times while we've been doing research, and I'm like, it's kind of creepy to think about, like, trying to hunt down a topic where you can cover a female serial killer and like really getting into it and then realizing like, this is just kind of sloppiness. Like, they were getting away with a lot of shit for a long time.
Right.
Like, but the meticulous nature of some of these killings is like, if they would have just kept doing this and not escalating in the way that the typical serial killer does, you just sort of wonder, like, what if someone did have more control over this, like, God complex that they have? And then you see, like, some of the more famous serial killers that were never solved, like the Zodiac killer, and then the Golden State Killer, somehow that didn't get solved for forever.
What if the Zodiac Killer is a woman?
Like, seriously, like, does anyone really consider that? I don't think anyone considered that back in the day until, like, more time passed and you start reviewing the stuff where it's like the Zodiac Killer is probably dead by now, and then people start thinking like maybe it was a woman. Like, why didn't that thought ever come to someone's head way back in the day?
Yeah.
So, but either way, that was a fascinating topic. So good job, Robin.
Thanks.
All right, before we move on to our next topic, we're going to take a quick commercial break.
Welcome to the other half of the episode. And Adam, why don't you tell us about your thing?
Okay, I will. I just said, like, I'm going to go ahead and bring us back, and then she just blurted something out and scared the shit out of me. So this week, I really wanted to cover something that I find absolutely fascinating. It's a topic that comes up in so many movies and books and comic books and anime and probably hentai, I don't know.
What the French toast?
No one reads it for the story. I actually was revisiting a story that I wrote, like a short story that I had set aside, that I'd written some time ago, before that involved this concept, and it really just made me want to dig back into this. And this topic is, of course, time travel. So we've actually dipped our toes into the time travel realm before. Robin was actually the first to cover the topic of time travel on the show.
Because I love Doctor Who.
way back, and I'm going to reference Doctor Who in a little bit.
Oh, are you really?
Way back on episode 2, which was released in December of 2017, three and a half years ago.
Since 2017?
Yep. And I feel like I just time traveled because
God.
I suddenly feel old as fuck.
Oh, we've been doing this for so long.
I know. I
Y'all.
was just a baby when we started this podcast, and I'm 35 going on 36 now. I know, it's a crazy thing. But the concept...
I'm turning 32 this year. No.
The concept of time travel is so interesting to me, especially, and there are so many different things to talk about with it that I'm going to be very focused on what I want to talk about here, because, like, I could just sit here and talk about a bunch of different stuff when it comes to just, like, theoretical time travel and the possible ways that it could actually be, like, possible. That said, one of my favorite things involving time travel is actually something that a lot of folks consider their least favorite part, which is the paradox. A lot of times, especially in media nowadays, when you watch something or read something, they've removed the paradox so you don't have to have your brain teased too much.
Well, it's like that episode of Doctor Who in the first season. Well, in the, ninth season with Christopher Eccleston, where they have the episode where Rose wants to go back in time, but she keeps wanting to go back in time to save her dad, and they go to that same point over and over and over again.
It just cycles and cycles and cycles. Precisely. So I don't know, like, how many of you are familiar with a bunch of different works, whether it's literary or movies or television, but, like, it seems like each one has their own set of rules. And sometimes they'll even refer to a set of rules in the movie, like Avengers Endgame is very meta in how they deal with time travel, because they literally refer to, is this Back to the Future? Is this other types of ways that this is done? That said, it's like, are you talking about Terminator rules? Are you talking about Avengers rules? Like, I'm talking about the paradox specifically. So I don't know how many of you have read like H.G. Wells' The Time Machine or seen the movie from 2012 with Guy Pearce, which is a fairly decent adaptation of the book.
Who's Guy Pearce?
He's an actor. I'm not going to try and name the movies he's been in because we've done this before with Guy Pearce, and you just always look at me dumbfounded.
Okay.
That said, the idea is that something happens to this main character in the book The Time Machine that he can't live with, an event that's so traumatic he decides, I can't deal with this. And that event is what pushes him to decide to go back in time and keep it from happening. And he sets out to build a time machine, and after much effort, he succeeds. After a little tweaking and testing, he makes it back to the moment of this traumatic event and does something to prevent that traumatic event from taking place. And then immediately after the original event doesn't take place, a new tragic event happens with the exact same result. Like, immediately. So if you were going back in time to keep someone from getting hit by a car, you'd shove them out of the way when you travel back in time, and then a, like, building would fall on them, or something like that.
It's like, time always tries to correct itself, right?
Correct.
Okay.
That's absolutely right. And the idea behind it isn't so much the theory and the way we think of it now as, like, time fights back, which is sort of how it's been sensationalized in popular media nowadays. It's legitimately just if you sit down and actually think through what a paradox is, when this was first presented, it's the idea that the tragic event is what originally inspired him to create the time machine. So without the tragic event, he could not be in the past. The time machine couldn't exist. So therefore, the fact that he's there and the time machine exists makes time correct to basically keep everything moving, everything still making sense.
Because he has to create the time machine for a reason.
Correct. And like in popular media, like in Back to the Future and other things, if you make changes, you would disappear. You know, like that's sort of the whole concept behind like the first Back to the Future, where he has the picture and he starts fading out at some point because events aren't lining up enough. Exactly. Like trying to fuck his mom. It gets really weird. So it's such a weird concept for a movie. I love the John Mulaney joke about Back to the Future's pitch. If you've never listened to it, you have got to hear that joke.
I mean, Luke and Leia made out. Okay.
They kissed. But I mean, I'm sure they banged behind the scenes.
Ew. What?
What?
No.
You brought it up, so
There's
don't
no
get mad
way.
at me.
I wouldn't. No.
So.
No.
I really love that idea, not the Luke and Leia thing, but I really love the idea of time travel and the idea of the paradox. Like, you have to be aware of everything that inspired you to get back there, because that won't be able to be changed. And that's why I love the original Terminator when I grew up and rewatched it, because when I was a kid, Terminator 2 was the thing that I thought was the best thing in the world. But when I grew up enough to realize this is a science fiction movie, not just an action movie, about the paradox, like the savior of the human race in the future, John Connor, sends back a soldier from the future to protect his mom when they learn that the machines have created a time machine to send back a machine to assassinate the mother before she can ever give birth to the savior of the future. And that's the thing, is that the soldier he sends back to protect his mother falls in love with his mother and takes her to Pound Town. And you realize in that movie that the soldier is the father of the future savior and always has been. So it's a time paradox where you can't change the future or prevent the war from happening. Otherwise, you prevent the savior who protects the human race from being born. And it's so cool because when you watch it when you're a kid, you're like, I don't fucking get this. And then when you get older and you rewatch, you're like, holy shit, like this is totally like a retelling of the time machine in just a much more brutal and like R-rated sci-fi way. So without the war existing, his dad can't be sent back, so the war always has to happen. And that idea carries over into Terminator 2, which is why I really liked Terminator 2 growing up, because it's the idea of you can't fight fate. You know, it's the younger version of the Savior and his mom trying to stop the war from happening, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's there too. But like,
Okay.
That's sort of where my fascination with the paradox of time travel came from. I'm not even going to jump into the Avengers Endgame rules, which is totally based on a time travel theory called the Many Worlds Theory. Maybe I'll cover that more in depth in Time Travel 3. There are so many different theories that it'll make your brain explode just to sit down and talk about all of them, especially if you're like me and you really can't wrap your head around all the science and theoretical nature of it. One of the most recent ideas that came to folks about why you would time travel. So think about when you talk about time travel, maybe you're sitting around with your friends having a drink and someone says, hey, if you could travel back in time, what would you do? You know, and a lot of people, the default answer is like, I'd go back in time and kill Hitler, you know? And that's sort of like something I think all of us have heard at some point or seen media where like there's a Doctor Who episode about going back in time and killing Hitler. So
Is it really?
yeah. It's
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I remember now.
one of the most recent ideas that people talk about is going back in time in order to prevent COVID-19 from spreading and becoming a global pandemic. And it's been talked about so frequently, it was actually considered by the scientific community to go over the concept and explain to people how theoretical time travel could work. And the idea that creating time travel for that purpose of going back in time to stop COVID-19 from spreading would create a paradox. And I'm not going to pretend to understand all the science that goes into explaining why it's theoretically possible that time travel could exist. But that guy named Einstein had a theory on general relativity that theoretically can apply to what are called closed time-like curves. And the best way to describe this without getting a nosebleed is that if there were a patient 0, for example, for COVID-19, so someone where it all started from, traveling back in time and preventing them from getting COVID would be theoretically possible. That said, the closed time-like curve basically accounts for the millions of other variables in something so catastrophic like COVID-19, along with the fact that you invented time travel to prevent COVID-19.
Right.
And essentially, it scientifically shows you that things would just adjust, so that would no longer be patient 0. Someone else would become patient 0. And the more effort that you took in order to stop COVID-19 from spreading, it would just find a new avenue, essentially, to just decimate the world as it has.
All right.
So it's just another example of how science just decided to sit down and say, here's how time travel would work if someone tried to do this. And it's very meta. It really makes you think like, man, this sounds super weird, and it kind of sounds like Avengers, but it kind of sounds like Terminator. I'm not exactly sure where this lies. And although it's crazy to think about, I think the best comparison for this is the fact that if you're thinking about this theoretically, and they're telling you that you can't change certain events, especially if they inspire the creation of time travel, you can consider those things time-locked, which is a phrase from Doctor Who where he states there's just some things you can't change.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best example that I've been able to attach to when it comes to this theory of paradox. There's just some things you can't change. So if that is the case, could there be time travelers? Like, I mean, the idea that if it is possible theoretically where you could go back and change things as long as it's not time locked means that they could exist and maybe have been traveling this entire time.
Yeah.
It's not, it's funny too, because Doctor Who says like, people think of time as like a straight line, but it's more like
wibbly wobbly, timey wimey.
Exactly. If you're thinking of time that way, we don't have to have time travel in present day for there to be time travelers in present day, if you catch my drift. So some good examples of this are almost certainly some Photoshop shit I'm going to go through. And they're pictures that you can find on the internet. So this next part of my topic, I'm going to tell the very short story of a supposed time traveler caught on camera, and then I'm going to show the picture to Robin so she can give you her interpretation of what she's seeing.
Is it the guy in sunglasses who walks around the crowd?
I have multiple things, so don't try and think that you're going to predict every single one of them because I know how much you like to spoil my topics. All right, so this first one is the one that you just predicted, and I hate you. It's called the Time Traveling Hipster. Let me bring it up. So this photo was taken in 1941 in British Columbia, and it shows a group of people standing at the reopening ceremony of the South Fork Bridge. The thing that's interesting about this picture is one person does not appear to be in time appropriate garb. So describe the picture and what we're seeing as a supposed time traveler.
It's just a bunch of people in suit and ties and era appropriate hats.
All the men have hats.
He's the only one in a fucking hoodie and t-shirt.
It looks like he's wearing a Weezer t-shirt and like a pullover on top of it, and he definitely has sunglasses on.
He's wearing like some Oakleys or something.
Yeah, it just doesn't look like he belongs there. You know, it's not necessarily as someone who's a time traveler, but they look out of place for sure.
Even the lighting looks off, though.
That's why I think
looks
some
like
of these
so much like Photoshopped in there. Like a very good Photoshop, but Photoshop nonetheless.
Some of these photos I am going to put on our Instagram/Facebook that'll go along with the episode. So be on the lookout for that if you want to check out some of these pictures yourself. So that's the time traveling hipster. This next one is called the Circus Extra. So this one is actually a video that shows an extra in the Charlie Chaplin silent film, The Circus, that appears to be holding a cell phone according to the internet. And everyone was abuzz with this because this is actual footage of the actual movie, so it's not photoshopped. And people are insistent that this is a time traveler who just decided to be in a Charlie Chaplin movie, but decided to have their cell phone on there, probably so they could travel back into their present, and tell everyone, like, you gotta check out what I did. So, alright, here we go, Robin.
Wouldn't
it's
that
very
be funny
quick.
to do?
It'd be fucking hilarious to do, but alright, here we go. Tell me if you think this woman's on a cell phone.
Alright. Yes, it does look like she is on a cell phone.
It certainly does. And that's the thing is that
why else would she have her hand up to her ear like that?
You can't see anything in her hand, so it's very, very hard to tell, but it certainly seems as though they're pantomiming the action as if you were on the phone. It even looks like they're speaking as they walk by on camera.
It sounds like she's looking around like, can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now? Good. And one of the things, especially on the YouTube video that I just showed her this, is every fucking comment is the same person saying that, oh my god, there wouldn't be cell phone towers, they wouldn't be able to use that. It's like, everyone fucking knows that. That's why everyone's commenting the same thing. It's just the fact that she's holding her hand to her ear and behaving as if she's talking into a cell phone that makes things odd.
Even if it were a walkie-talkie, those don't exist yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that wouldn't exist.
Wait, unless it did. No, it would have to have a lot more cables and a big box.
Yeah, there's nothing that would be wireless in this way, shape, or form.
Okay.
That said, I do think there's something to be said about the fact that when people see these things, these pictures or these videos online of eras where there are not cell phones, it is immediately assumed if they're holding their hand to their ear or their face, they must be talking on a cell phone because we're all so fucking used to having a cell phone ready at any given time that there's no other action a human being could have ever taken where they'd put their hand to their face. And obviously I'm being facetious because there's a million other reasons why someone could put their hand to their face. And we just assume anytime we see it, it must be the action we take in the, like, present day. She
doesn't look like she's scratching her head or anything, though. It just...
It certainly looks like she's walking and talking.
It looks like she has her hands wrapped around something pressed to her face. It's weird. It's real weird.
All right, let's move on to the next one.
All right.
This next one is really interesting. It's a photo of a mummy. Let me bring it up right now. There we go. All right, so it's a photo of a mummy's feet, in fact. And this one came from a mummy discovered in Mongolia. And it appears as though the footwear of this mummy, which has been encased, is somewhat out of the time period.
Those look like some sick-ass Toms.
People, recognized an actual Adidas design that looks very similar to this.
No way.
And people freaked out saying, this is clear evidence of a time traveler who died in the past.
Can they test the
tiger
material?
Stripe, they could. When they tested the material, it appeared to be 1,100 years old, which is what they also dated the mummy as. Because if you travel back in time, it's like you're still going to have that shit deteriorate for 1,100 years.
But can't they test for synthetic fibers? Because if it's an Adidas trainer, synthetic fibers, probably.
Well, when they did do tests, they dug into it and they stated that it seems as though the materials themselves were time appropriate and that it is more likely that this is a seamstress of the region who was wearing some custom footwear that they had themselves created that just happened to look like some sick-ass kicks.
I mean, look at the stitching. Look at the stitching. It looks like a sewing machine did that stitching.
It really looks like someone went back in time and they knew how to make shoes and they decided they were going to make themselves the closest thing to the shoes that they had from the present day they left. So this one is
some Outlander shit.
This one's funny. I have a note for my next one. So we have two more to go. So this next one is called Time Surfer. And this one is another case of non-period garb. And this is in the bottom left of the frame because there's a lot of people in this picture. So I'll let you identify this person. And
the guy in the board shorts and a t-shirt?
Yeah, and this picture is from 100 years ago, and everyone else is in top hats and suits, and the women are all dressed in period appropriate garb, and then there's this dude in a fucking black t-shirt and board shorts sitting on a rock. And people on the internet state that there are several individuals in the photo who seem to be taken aback by what he's wearing or his presence. The guy to his immediate left
is looking at him like, what? Oh, and these two people around him are just like,
who the fuck is this guy? And then there's a woman across the frame
who's like
who
pointing
seems
at
to
him.
be pointing like, what the hell is that guy wearing? I think she's really pointing upwards if you look at it. So it's not very much reliable to say she's pointing at this guy, but he just looks out of place. It's not like someone couldn't have just put on some clothes from the past that weren't as dignified as everyone else in the picture.
Right.
And because they had this dumpy sort of look, they just wound up mirroring what we look like in the casual dress of 2021. No one nowadays would wear a 3-piece suit and a top hat to sit on a rock and take a picture with a bunch of other very well-dressed people.
I feel like we need to do that now.
I think people just have a very low standard because of convenience and time's sake for how they get dressed, especially during the pandemic. I haven't worn real pants in months.
Listen,
I have to wear them a lot.
I hung out with my sister Liz the other day, and she had a hoodie on with a shirt underneath, and I had a hoodie on. And so she was like, I'm really hot, so I'm going to take my jacket off. I was like, okay. And I was telling her, I was like, I'm really hot right now. She's like, why don't you just take your jacket off? I just lifted up my sweater and just showed her my, like, naked tummy. And she's like, what the fuck? Because it's like, sometimes you're just really lazy. And you're
saying you think this was a really lazy person back 100 years ago.
I'm just saying that's how I get dressed now. I don't want to put on 1,000,001 layers. You know?
I think if you were to drop your visual standards for how you look far enough, people in the future might see a picture of you and decide that you were trendy enough to be a hipster that traveled back in time, and then you'll be remembered forever. It's the true version of immortality, which is the real time travel. All right, I thought this picture was really funny because you've watched so much Outlander that I could just imagine a tourist tapping something and all of a sudden being put back in time, being like, sure, I'll take a fucking photo, whatever. And this one screamed Outlander to me more than any of the other ones.
Really?
Although there's every time I walk in on that show, it's either consensual sex, which is very rare, or
unconsensual
rape. And I'm always just like, God, I hate this show. So, okay, one more photo to go over.
I'm waiting for that season 6.
So I'm going to go ahead and show you a little bit of internet sleuth gold that people were insistent a few years back proved that time travel was real. And this picture is shocking when you first see it, but then I'm going to give you some backstory on it. This is a World War II soldier in a photo with his compatriots on a boat, and he has his face buried in his elbow while his other arm is up in the air in what is known commonly as a dab. And he is fucking nailing it.
Are you sure this isn't a movie set?
So let me go ahead and tell you what this actually is. So the internet took this and said this colorized photo from World War II clearly shows someone that time traveled back and decided to show off to his friends by dabbing in this photo. Because, you know, if you time traveled back to 1942 or whenever this photo was taken, you would definitely join military service just so you could dab and then, you know, probably die immediately afterwards.
You could get, like, forcefully put into military service.
You could, but if you were a time traveler, I imagine you would just bounce out at that point rather than be like, they're going to take all my possessions. I'll go ahead and let them do it so I can take this sick-ass photo.
Oh my gosh.
So the internet sincerely wanted to believe this one. This is definitely an I want to believe moment. But in case you haven't guessed, which Robin obviously already did, it's because this isn't an actual photo from World War II. The internet just decided to say it was without doing any fucking research. It's a photo of a bunch of extras during the filming of the film Dunkirk. And one dude just decided to dab the fuck out of the photo, and everyone decided he was a time traveler from the future.
It's just, that movie was so intense.
It was really good, but it was really intense.
It's I can understand why a lot of people on the internet would believe that, because that movie is so realistic.
Yeah, and everything in that looks like it's from 1942.
Right. Well, that one veteran who went to go see it was
walked out.
Well, he walked out because he's just like, I lived through this.
I went through this once. I don't need to do it again.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that movie, oh man, I remember just being on the edge of my seat.
It's because you were sliding off your seat because you're like, oh my God, Tom Hardy is
you
so
can never
fucking
even
hot.
see Tom Hardy's face.
She would see his eyes. She'd be like, he's so hot.
Shut up.
It's totally true.
I don't know. Pilots.
She had a
me.
full big gulp while we were going through that, but she was so thirsty the whole film. So this is a good example of the internet taking something and spinning it up and acting like they've somehow discovered something, just like the internet sleuthing with Elisa Lam and things like that, where they're absolutely wrong, but who cares about facts? They'd rather have this interesting story to go by.
The Elisa Lam thing where she was turning exiting the elevator, and people
Oh,
thought
there's
that
another
there was
foot.
another
It's like, it's her
No,
foot.
it's just the back of her foot.
It's like, we're going to go ahead and destroy this person's life because he stayed in the same hotel and he's really creepy and has lyrics that can be interpreted as murdering her in particular, but he was there a year before she was. Everyone just ignored that detail to destroy the person's life. And then he tried to commit suicide. So another example
But this episode is not about that.
Yeah, another example of the internet just being way too ready to jump onto something that is absolute bullshit. So if this is the case, how else are we going to identify time travelers if not through internet pictures? Well, I clearly identified one back in the Simpsons Prophecy episode in episode 117. Side note, almost all Simpsons prophecies are actually just social commentary that people forgot about. Sometimes, though, time travelers will identify themselves. Or it's people lying about being time travelers. And way back in episode 2, I mentioned an individual known as John Titor. I actually wrote a paper on him back in college a long time ago. A few years after he showed up when he was still actively posting. I did all my research and I said this is most likely fake, but here's all the things that are being predicted. My professor at the time was so offended that I would write a paper about possible time travel. He gave me a very low grade and then lectured me about how time travel wasn't possible. And when I told him about a scientific experiment between a clock on the ground and a clock in a plane flying around the world, and how that theoretically proves Einstein's theory of relativity because the clocks were synchronized until the plane came back around, having been flying with the rotation of the Earth, they were slightly off. He told me it was all bullshit, and it was essentially, he just said, science doesn't exist. Like, if it was the Middle Ages, he would have burned me alive. He hated my paper so much.
Wow.
So I'm turning it into a fucking part of my topic. Fuck you. Anyways, John Titor was a person who started posting to online bulletin boards back in 2000 and 2001 before stuff like Reddit or 4chan or any of the other internet bulletin boards that are super popular nowadays existed. When he started posting, he claimed he was a time traveler from 2036, which we are closer to now than we are 2001 when he started posting.
Shut up! No, shut up! Oh no!
He started posting originally in the Time Travel Institute forums, and he would post information on what it would actually take to build a time machine, as if he knew. Robin's so blown away by that fact.
Oh, no.
He posted for about a year, alternating between discussing technology used to travel through time and what he did in the future before he came back. Titor had many specific predictions, along with a few vague ones. He stated he was part of the American military of 2036. He even posted a picture of the emblem of the military, which looks absolutely nothing like the current American military. I will not be posting that to our Instagram. You can Google it if you'd like to see it. I will let you know in a little bit why I'm not posting that. That said, the space...
Oh, is it the UN?
No.
Okay.
The Space Force logo, which looks nearly identical to the Starfleet logo from Star Trek, bears the most resemblance of any of the military logos because of that signature swish around that upward triangle.
Yeah.
If someone were to come forward and say, we're going to go ahead and get rid of the similarities between the Star Trek logo and the Space Force logo in the future and remove the triangle and add a few more swishes in there and some more spirals, this might actually look something like that.
Okay, I thought it had to do with like the Halo thing when they used the UNSC emblem.
Nothing like that.
But was that an actual government that
No, it was the news.
Was it the news?
Some news organization posted the military logo from the game Halo as the Space Force logo. Because why not? It's such an absurd story in the first place. They're like, who fucking cares? So Titor stated he was selected for a mission to return to the past to retrieve a 1975 IBM 5100 computer, which was needed to debug legacy computer programs in 2036. And this triggered a lot of people to think he might actually be telling the truth. Because,
very specific.
Side note, there is an actual code issue that exists that is still not solved called the year 2038 problem. It's essentially just like Y2K, which I covered, so you should be familiar with what the Y2K issue was. At a certain point, calendars in 2038, I think it's like January 19th, based off of the way things are coded, and I think it's Unix, would align to the point where they would reset. And when that happened, calendars would reset to December 13th, 1901. Because of this issue in Unix, which is a very specific language, some very specific systems would malfunction. Like anti-locking brake systems in cars and other vehicles, electronic stability controls, traction controls in vehicles, four-wheel drives, aerial guidance systems in airplanes, helicopters, anything that
That's
flies,
nuts.
GPS receivers, things like that would malfunction in the year 2038 if not solved or switched over to newer technology. Other stuff as well would malfunction, and the fact that he mentions this seems to lend towards the idea that whatever is happening in the supposed year of his present, 2036, has something to do with this Y2K38 bug that needs to be fixed. Some of the predictions that he makes are very specific. For instance, he stated in 2004 the election that would take place would trigger the Second American Civil War. So we're touching on the Civil War again. The war would spread with, quote, a Waco-type event every month, and then would steadily get worse until the year 2008, when it would engulf the entire country. He went on to state that the U.S. would split into 5 separate regions, all at war with one another. The war would escalate until 2015, when the factions would trigger a literal World War III when other countries would become involved that would be very intense, but very brief. And the culminating event would be known as End Day because it would be a nuclear war.
Wow.
He states during his post that Washington, D.C. and Jacksonville, Florida, because fuck the Jags, right, would be hit by nuclear weapons during these battles. Omaha, Nebraska would become the new capital of the United States after the war would end. After posting this, he was asked for specifics on what caused the Civil War to start, not just the election would trigger it, because that's not how wars work. And Titor was very vague. He just said order and rights. That's it. That's all he would give. So people were like, he's being very vague so that he doesn't accidentally trigger the Civil War in case there's a way we can avoid it.
Like a linchpin.
Which is people, making bullshit up for him. Because he's being very vague. Because it's like a fortune cookie. Like, you will have a challenging day. It's like, okay, what fucking challenge? Am I going to get pulled over? Am I going to lose my job? What kind of challenge? But he was very vague about that. He would go on to be very vague again later when asked about when the other countries joined the war and escalated it to World War III and with nuclear weapons. He stated border clashes and overpopulation were the reasons that the other countries got involved and decided to use nuclear weapons.
And none of this happened.
Obviously. He stated the conflict in the Middle East was a milestone that showed we were already on track. It was this marker of an impending World War III conflict in the American Civil War as well. Side note, this isn't something terribly original to take one of the oldest conflicts still in existence that's existed for as long as pretty much anyone can remember and stating that this is an example of how World War III is going to happen. It has been done a million times. He claimed to be born in 1998, even though he was posting this in 2000 and 2001. He said he joined the Fighting Diamondbacks, a shotgun infantry unit in Florida at the age of 13. He did state when questioned on the rules of time travel that the many worlds theory was indeed correct, which means I do have to explain this fucking thing. It's the theory that they use in Avengers Endgame. So if you've really dug into Endgame, you might understand it.
When they pull one stone out, it creates a different timeline.
Well, exactly. So what it really breaks down to, if you're not going through Avengers Endgame explanation, is that in quantum physics, there is a bunch of different examples of how something can have two states at the same time. Schrodinger's cat, things like that. And some experiments have actually proved that there's electrons and other things that can exist in two states at the same time. What this essentially lends to is the idea that every possibility that could ever exist exists in some form of alternate universe or alternate world. So if you're at a stoplight trying to decide where to go and you decide to turn left instead of right, there is a world that exists specifically related to the choice that you did not make, where you did make that choice. And for all the people all over the world and all the choices we make, obviously there would have to be a lot of worlds. It's not technically an infinite number of worlds that exist. It's just many worlds.
There's an episode of Futurama about that.
Is there?
Yeah, where there's a box that the professor has, and within that box are different worlds depending on the decisions that the crew makes. And so there's like a different Leela and a different Fry, and they live different lives. Like in the alternate, there's an alternate world where Fry and Leela are together already, or something like. There's a whole bunch of It's used in Avengers Endgame essentially to say that if you go back in time and change something, it won't change their present. You can't go back in time and kill Thanos when he's a baby and then save your world. Your timeline's already written. Like, your past is always going to be there. All you can do is take something or adjust something in a different timeline and basically fuck over someone else. So, that said, Titor only brings this up when people start pointing out that some of his predictions that he made
are not coming true. And he's stating by coming back in time, he's made alterations to our timeline that have prevented these things from happening, basically declaring himself a pseudo sort of savior like John Connor in the Terminator by simply existing and coming back in time and talking about it
like
on internet forums.
Effect?
Kind of, but it's more like his future is still going to be fucked. So he's still telling the truth, but our future is saved. So there's no telling whether or not any of his predictions will come true, which is just a really nice way to cover the fact that a lot of the things he predicted are definitely not going to fucking happen.
Yeah.
Naturally, lots of people thought this was horseshit as it happened and continued to think it was horseshit afterwards. It is one of the first examples of something like just an internet post on a forum going viral, because this did spread through internet culture before things like YouTube, or other things where you could relate over a specific medium. Maybe E-Bombs World was out there, but we really didn't go on there and post a lot of stuff. I used to just go there to watch videos, similar to how everyone watches YouTube nowadays. As we know, in 2021, no Civil War happened in the United States. No World War III happened. He spent time insisting that this disease known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease would spread through beef products and contribute to the start of the Civil War, which actually did kick up in the mid-early 2000s.
Mad cow disease?
It's not exactly mad cow disease. It's a degenerative brain disorder. I thought it was also mad cow disease, but it seems to be something a little bit different. But he insisted that this would happen and lead to the Civil War. And when that popped up, people started talking about him again and all of his theories. So,
isn't there something that goes through deer that's like a degenerative brain eating? It turns them into like deer zombies or something?
I heard of it before, but I'm not sure what it's called, to be honest with you. So one of the final things that he stated when he was asked online is that whether or not UFOs or extraterrestrials actually existed. He stated that this idea has not been explained in his future. It's still a mystery, but there is a general acceptance by the people of that time based off of their technology and all the things that have been witnessed that UFOs are not extraterrestrials. They're actually time travelers with much better technology that have come to the past. And that is what we're seeing when we see these ships. We're not actually seeing extraterrestrials. We're seeing time travelers. And as a side note, I know I'm saying this guy's full of shit, but if that's the truth, I fucking called it, because I've totally said that multiple times on multiple episodes. And then after that, he just stopped posting.
So then why do they abduct us?
Who knows? John Titor is probably full of shit on this. And, you know, extraterrestrials may exist and he may be a liar. It's a lot of variables in these different ideas, and there's no way of telling which ones are real and which ones are not. A lot of people that are skeptics will just say that they're all fake. And then he just stopped posting. No one knew where he went. He just sort of disappeared, but lots of folks assumed that he went back to his time. Other folks assumed that he just decided to stop lying on the internet, which, considering his insistence that the many worlds theory is correct, if he went back to his own time, really makes me think that it's not exactly just a time travel machine. You'd have to change universes and change your point in time, which seems even more complicated. I feel like the mechanics of building a time machine like that are even more difficult. A private investigation, though, that was done in the late 2000s revealed, I think when you say late 2000s, people might think like 2999, like in the late early aughts, which just sounds like we're super old, revealed a few things. So there was an IP address connected with one of Titor's posts that was geolocated to Kissimmee, Florida. Not shocking that this person was talking about being from Florida when they were posting from Florida.
Yeah.
A company was formed on September 16th, 2003 called the John Titor Foundation, with the man named Larry Haber as the CEO. His brother, Maury Haber, was a computer scientist, while Larry was an entertainment lawyer. And the private detective, through some undisclosed findings, stated in a report he published that these two men perpetrated the Titor hoax using the fears of individuals at the time like Y2K, Bush versus Gore, and the results and how tumultuous that election was, the Iraq War, and the war in Afghanistan. The Iraq War was developing and people saw it coming down the road, and he had several veiled things to a coming conflict, which was just sort of writing on the wall at that point. In 2018, a man named Joseph Matheny came forward and stated that the John Titor posts were a literary experiment that was done deliberately to observe the response of folks online, and he had worked on that project for those individual responses, but did not name who it was that owned the project. He just stated he worked on it, and it was not his, but that it was a hoax. Considering all the predictions of Titor were wrong, it definitely seems like this was manufactured bullshit. The many worlds theory would actually lend to the thought that the overlap of our worlds leading up to the posts would mean at least one of these things would probably happen, you know?
Right.
All of these variables would adjust where something that was time locked would still wind up happening. So if there is something you can take from this story and this topic as a whole, it's that time travel may theoretically be possible. And in addition to that, people who lie about being time travelers are really bad at predicting the future. And the internet tends to just buy into it because it's way more interesting than saying you don't believe in something that's likely wrong.
Yeah.
So there really is a whole lot we could dive into with time travel, but like I said, I wanted to be very specific about what we covered for time travel too, so we'll dive into more things when it comes to Time Travel 3. So that, my spooky friends, is Time Travel number 2.
Nice, thanks.
Thank you.
I love time travel. I don't know. I find it absolutely fascinating, and there are so many things out there about supposed time travelers or like the out of place artifacts thing.
Right.
It's really interesting.
There's a lot of stuff we can cover online. A lot of things are online hoaxes or online presences of people stating, I'm a time traveler and I'm posting here for the reason of I want attention, you know?
Yeah.
But there's a little bit more crazy stuff we'll eventually dive into. Not a whole lot of things with background on them that would make a full episode, but maybe Time Travel 3, when I get around to it, will be some of those smaller things of very odd happenings where people were assumed to be time travelers, whether it's through contemporary times or from history, that we might compile or something like that. I'm still thinking of ideas for Time Travel Part 3, but that'll be further on down the road. But anyways, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate every single one of you. If you would like to watch us record our Storytime or Pasta Time episodes live, we do that 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every Wednesday at youtube.com/Scaryish and twitch.tv/Scaryish podcast. If you would like to send us a story or recommend a pasta time or a creepy pasta that we could read, you can email storytime@scaryish.com. For your personal stories of things that have happened to you, a friend, a family member that's paranormal, supernatural, true crime, extraterrestrial, or maybe time travel related. Or you can email pastatime@scaryish.com with a fictional short story you've written or a suggestion for a creepypasta on the internet that we could find. We would love to hear from you. You can also go to facebook.com/Scaryish podcast to check out our stuff there. Go to our website, scaryish.com, or hit us up on Twitter, which is @ScarishPod, or Instagram, which is @ScarishPodcast.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of stuff. Yeah, a lot of stuff coming out of the mouth on that one. So, Robin, if folks would like to donate to us, how can they do so?
You can go to patreon.com/Scaryish podcast. And those are monthly donations. There's a whole bunch of different tiers on there. Tiers start at $1. And at $1, you get ad-free episodes. So if you don't want to hear any of the ads, head on over there. It's only $1 buckaroo, 4 quarters. If you don't like the whole monthly subscription thing, you can also go to Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/Scaryish podcast. And those are one-time donations. All your donations go to helping us upgrade our studio setup, helping us create more content. We just invested in a vlogging camera. I'm so excited to start hopefully trying to record small itty-bitty things that I can learn to edit because I have no idea how to edit yet. But yeah.
Indeed. Very excited. Thank you so much to folks who donate. We really are able to expand the content we bring you. And Robin's been wanting that camera and has had several ideas for some time. So the fact that we're able to build up to get it is pretty amazing. And it's all thanks to you folks. So we appreciate all the support we get. It's really just unbelievable. So.
Absolutely unbelievable. Like, oh my God, I'm so excited.
So we can't wait to bring that extra new fancy stuff to you folks, but we are going to have to get into the swing of things. And like Robin said, she's going to learn how to do it, and then we'll hopefully have new stuff for you. So that said, I think that is the episode of 169. We didn't even do a 69 joke for this one. But yeah, Robin, go ahead and sign us out.
Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.